have a few options here in the tree where I can actually eliminate a selected path from a player's strategy. If I've node locked a lot, I can reset those strategies in a particular tree. I can solve from a particular point, which is actually really useful if I'm at a turn node here. So perhaps I'm at a turn node and I don't want to necessarily solve an individual tree all over, solve the whole tree all over again. I can solve from that particular point in the tree, which is a lot faster, obviously. Once I get to the turn, it's a lot faster to solve turn nodes. I can do so at more accuracy as well too, as opposed to going back to the flop and solving all the way to the flop. That tends to be particularly useful when I have done my flop analysis and I'm working my way through a particular line to the turn. I'm happy with the ranges that get to the turn, and I want to work from there to see what a solution might look like here. I might do that in this scenario and solve from the turn using this solve from here option. Jumping down actually really fast, I could also create a subtree configuration. So if I get to this King of Diamonds section, I can actually click create subtree configuration, and it'll actually open up a new solver window, in which case I have the full flop and turn that's already entered. I have new ranges that reflect the ranges that I've already gotten to that turn node with, and I can actually rerun the solve from there too. So really cool option and really cool way that I can actually rebuild a tree and start working towards a portion of that tree and actually solve that portion of that tree. There's an option here to change the rake structure. So similar to changing the ICM here on the tools section, or the ICM calculator on the tools section, I can change the rake structure in the tree. I can also change the ICM structure in this tree as well too. So if I already have built the tree, I can change these as well. And then the navigate piece, this is again a way I can actually navigate quickly to a different node in the tree, and I don't really use this navigate functionality as much. I find it easier just to work my way through the tree this way, but the option is there for you in order to do the tree navigation as well. Finally, there's this analysis tab, and I say finally, there's this about tab, which really at the end of the day is just this about PioViewer. If I click on the about tab, it's going to open up this window here, which is going to show me what version I'm using and if it's up to date or not. But the analysis tab does have some items that lets me analyze things a little bit further. So these first two, the runouts aggregated frequencies analysis and the runouts aggregated frequencies analysis over multiple files, it's going to let me export some data into Excel or some other type of software that lets me analyze data outside of PioSolver. And that we're going to cover that in a lot more detail in module 6 when we talk through mass data analysis. But suppose I want to not necessarily look at one individual scenario. I want to look at either all of the possible turn cards on a particular hand, or maybe I want to look at a bunch of different boards within the same scenario, and I want to compare outputs for a lot of different boards or a lot of different cards or whatever the case may be together. Well, I would use one of these options here. So I'll start with this runouts aggregated frequencies analysis. By clicking this, it's going to open up this box here where I can actually look at multiple runouts. And in this case here, by looking at that top option, I can actually perform an analysis for a single node. I have a bunch of options that I can select here as to what I want to include within the results here, whether I want to look at all of the combos or just the individual hands. I can look at things from full precision or make them human readable. And then finally, I can actually include some or all of these report columns in here and customize them in different ways. And when I'm actually done with this, and I'll actually click this open when finished and hit OK, and you'll see at the bottom here, it's actually writing a file for me. And it goes really, really quick when you're doing a runouts analysis, but it generates this report. And I can open this report, and there's a few different CSVs that are actually here. CSV stands for comma separated values. And if I open this, it's gonna open up within Excel. And I see this value here where now I have this King 9-5 board, but instead of looking at the turn cards individually, now I can actually go through and look at them all at once. So instead of having just one turn card, that king that I looked at before, there are 49 possible turn cards that I can look at. And for each of those individual turn cards, I can see values like how frequently it happens, the global percentage here. I can see the equity, the EV, the equity realization for each player, as well as how frequently each player takes the strategic actions at that particular node. Really cool way to analyze things at a more macro level scale. We're going to cover this in a lot more detail in module number 6. The run out aggregated frequencies over multiple files, same exact thing, but instead of looking at things confined to one individual hand, now we can start looking at a lot of different boards, which is really, really useful when you're doing things like a flop analysis. There's a lot of various flops, and you may want to look at all of those flops for a particular formation against one another. That's what I'm actually doing with the analysis that you saw in the jobs trainer. When I'm solving all 1,755 flops, I'm doing so that I can run that analysis over all of those different boards and look at them at the same time to compare those boards to one another. I'll aggregate those boards using some type of different flop characteristics or flop heuristics and see if I can turn some insights into actionable strategies that I can implement at the table. Range Explorer, this is just opening up the Range Explorer in a new window, and we've seen the Range Explorer already. I do use that a lot. I use that Control R button a lot. The next is this hotness analysis portion here, and to do so, I'm actually going to reload the file because I've node locked a little bit. Things are going to change a little bit based on the outputs, so I'd rather actually just reload the file and show you the hotness tab that way. But once this file reloads, and it's working right now, I can go back to the browser and I'll work my way to a turn scenario. So we went check, check, and I'll load up the 2 of clubs here. And at equilibrium, the 2 of clubs after a check, check line, the 2 of clubs, we're checking the large majority of the time. We're betting small a portion of the time, betting large a portion of the time, and then the medium bet size is rarely used. Well, if I click on this runouts EV comparison, it's going to open up this window, and this window is going to have a grid of the top where I have all of the cards, and on the side I have all of the individual suits. This breakdown that we see here for one particular card, if I click on strategy, it's actually mimicked here for all of the cards in this grid. So I can see the 64% of the time that's checking on the 2 of clubs. That's going to align with this 64% right here. The 13% of the time it's betting small, it's going to align with the 13% of the time here, and so on and so forth. But instead of just looking at this for one card, I can now look at this for all of the cards. It's similar to exporting this out and looking at it through Excel, but now I'm looking at this visually within the PO viewer. Really, really, really cool way to look at turns or at rivers of all of the possible cards to see what are the cards that are particularly good for one player's range, what are the cards that are particularly poor for one player's range, and how range construction might differ based on how different turn or river cards come. We'll go through this a little bit when we actually look at analyzing outputs, because this is a really cool functionality to let us figure out how to actually analyze those outputs. The show frequencies of all lines option here is really a good way to show us how frequently different lines take place. So by bringing this over here, we can see all of the various lines within the game tree, and there are a lot of various lines within the game tree. This column here is going to show the PO syntax of what that line represents, but then you can actually kind of see the line take place here and visually, whether it's just a check, check, check. You can get down to some different bet options here as well too, but there's a lot of various lines that could take place here. The frequency of how often that line actually occurs. So we always make it to the root node. In this case here, the out of position player is checking virtually all the time. So the in position player is going to face a check at equilibrium almost 100% of the time. But things kind of tail off quickly after that, and I'll actually sort by frequency so you can see the most frequent lines to the least frequent lines here. It's also going to show the street that we're on for that particular line, as well as the node type. The node type is going to be a showdown node type or blank here in this spot. I could also show folds, which would show these node types of folds. I could also show all-in showdowns here as well too, and that will show up as all-in. But these are all of the various lines that could happen within a particular spot. Where going back to our first module where I showed you graphically how big a game tree can be, this is showing you all of these various lines of how big a game tree can be. And I'll even just sort this by frequency. It doesn't take long to get down to lines that don't happen very often, lines that happen less than 1% of the time. And I can continue scrolling all the way down the game tree. And a lot of these lines are very, very, very infrequent lines that actually take place, but the solver calculates values for all of them. So again, really cool way to visualize here how many different nodes or how many different lines are available within a particular game tree. Finally, there is this street strategy distribution map. And when I open this up, it's going to show me the strategies for the entire street visually. And it's pretty cool how this is actually being visualized. Because right now we can look at this, and I'll somewhat minimize this so we can actually see this both side by side. At the root node, the add a position player is checking the majority of the time, 391 combos, 99.99% of the time. And we can see that by this visualization here. But that's really all we can see at this visualization. Within this street strategy distribution, we now can see that at equilibrium, the overwhelming majority of the time, the out of position player is checking. Then it's the in position player's turn at this column here, and we can see visually how often the in position player is betting large, how often the in position player is betting small, and how often the in position player is checking, which would take us to a turn. For the different times in which the in position player bets, we can now see the out of position player's response to that and break that down. So for large bets, the out of position player raises a small frequency of the time and calls a frequency of the time and folds a frequency of the time. And when the out of position player check raises, we can even go down even further and see how the in position player responds to that, although the size actually gets fairly small in the window, so it's kind of hard to see. For the small bets, we can do the same thing and see how often the out of position player will raise, call, or fold, and then again, the in position player's response to that. So a lot of different ways in which we can visualize here how each player is going to respond to another and really visualize all of the strategies on a particular street. And that reaches the end of the options here in this top menu, which will ultimately reach the end of our PioSOLVER tutorial. Throughout the rest of the Solver Masterclass, I'm going to dive into this functionality and how to actually use this functionality and integrate it within your strategies itself in a much more detail. This was meant to be mainly a what, as I mentioned at the beginning, to go through what are the various options and kind of be like a video user manual for PioSOLVER. I'll do the same thing for GTO Plus in some upcoming videos, and in future videos within this module, I'm going to cover a lot of other solver technologies as well, as I mentioned in the introduction. But this does reach the end of our PioSOLVER portion of the video. So you can move on to the next video and go through the user manual for GTO Plus, or move on to module 3 where I start talking through how to actually build game trees, considerations that you might take when building those game trees. We're going to go through a lot of this functionality, but instead of actually kind of talking about them at the what level, I'm going to dig into the whys behind things.